300 Apache warriors surrounded Corbin Thorne's farm like a steel wall at dawn. He stood in the dirt yard, unarmed, watching Chief Dakota approach with a hunting knife. A blade Corbin recognized instantly. It had belonged to his brother James. Behind him, in the wooden shed, a young Apache girl named Keona lay unconscious, her shoulder still bleeding from a gunshot wound he'd spent the night trying to save. Dakota's eyes held no mercy. The silence pressed down like a thunderstorm ready to break. Around them, warriors sat motionless on horses, faces painted for war, not one weapon lowered, not one man blinked. Corbin's hands trembled. He knew this moment had been coming for 10 years. The chief stopped 3 feet away and spoke in perfect English, his voice cold as winter stone. "You killed my son today. Blood answers for blood." Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 10 years ago, Corbin Thorne had been a different man. At 25, he was hot-blooded and reckless. A cowboy who spent more time in saloons than on his own land. His wife Mary tried to steady him. Their 3-year-old daughter Sarah gave him reason to change. But the bottle always won. His older brother James was the opposite steady, wise. A skilled hunter who provided when Corbin's crops failed in the drought. The bank loan of $500 hung over them like a noose. When James disappeared during a hunting trip, 6 months passed, with no word. Corbin convinced himself his brother was dead. Then came the wagon train job. Corbin signed on as a guard, escorting settlers through Apache territory for $50. Easy money to feed his family. The attack came at night. Shadows moved between campfires. War cries split the darkness. Corbin fired blind into the chaos, his heart hammering. A figure in a leather mask lunged from the smoke. Corbin's rifle cracked once. The masked man fell. Dawn revealed the truth that would haunt Corbin forever. He knelt beside the body, pulled away the mask, and saw James staring back at him with empty eyes. His brother wore Apache clothing, carried Apache weapons. Later, other warriors told Corbin the terrible truth. James had married into the tribe, had been trying to warn his brother away from the dangerous route. Not attack. Corbin wanted to die right there. Mary found James's diary months later. In it, James had written about his new life, his Apache wife, his hope that one day Corbin would understand. When Mary confronted him with the truth he'd hidden, that he'd killed his own brother and lied about it, she left him. Took nothing but her wedding ring. Then Sarah got sick. A fever that wouldn't break. The doctor wanted $30 Corbin didn't have. He sold everything, tools, cattle, his brother's rifle. It wasn't enough. Sarah died in his arms, whispering that she was cold. Corbin stopped drinking that night, not from strength, but from emptiness. He sold their house in town, bought cheap land far from everyone, and built a small farm with his bare hands. For 5 years, he'd lived alone except for Thunder, a stubborn gray horse who didn't care about Corbin's past. Now, 35, Corbin wore silence like armor. His face was weathered, his hands soured. He owed the bank $850 with 60 days to pay. Nathaniel Crane, who owned half the territory, had made it clear. He wanted Corbin's land and the spring-fed well that made it valuable. Every night, Corbin sat at his table and stared at the only photograph he owned, Sarah, age 3, smiling in her Sunday dress. He'd whisper the same 2 words he'd said for 5 years, "I'm sorry." The guilt never faded. It was his only companion in the dark, patient as a wolf, waiting for the day it would finally consume him. that day had arrived with 300 Apache warriors at dawn. The sun hung low that evening, painting the desert in shades of copper and blood. Corbin was driving his 12 cattle toward the pen when Thunder suddenly stopped. Ears flattened, the horse refused to move forward, nostrils flaring. "Easy, boy," Corbin murmured. But Thunder backed up, shaking his head. Then Corbin heard it, a weak, ragged sound like wind through broken glass. Breathing. Someone was breathing near the well. He dismounted slowly, hand moving to the rifle on his saddle. The well sat 20 yards from the fence line, surrounded by scattered brush and rocks. As he approached, he saw her. A young woman lay crumpled against the wooden post, one hand pressed to her left shoulder. Blood seeped between her fingers, dark and wet. She wore a deerskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork, and an eagle feather band held back her long black hair. Around her neck hung a necklace of turquoise stones carved with the shape of an eagle. Her eyes flickered open when his shadow fell across her face. They were brown and terrified. "Don't move," Corbin said quietly. "I'm not going to hurt you." She tried to speak, but only managed a weak gasp. Her lips were cracked from thirst, her skin pale beneath the dust. The gunshot wound in her shoulder was still bleeding. She had maybe 2 or 3 hours left if he didn't act. Corbin looked at the turquoise necklace again. 7 stones, perfectly carved. He didn't know much about Apache customs, but he'd heard that chiefs' daughters wore such markers. This girl wasn't just anyone. For a moment, he stood frozen. Helping her meant trouble, the kind of trouble that ended with a rope or a bullet. Then an image flashed through his mind. Sarah! 5 years ago, lying in bed with fever burning through her small body. Her hand reaching for his, her voice barely a whisper. "Papa, I'm cold." He'd had no money for medicine then. He'd been helpless, useless, watching his daughter die because he couldn't save her. But he could save this girl. Corbin made his decision in the space of a heartbeat. He scooped the young woman into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and carried her toward the wooden shed behind his house. Thunder followed, still uneasy, but trusting his master's judgment. Inside the shed, Corbin laid her on a pile of empty grain sacks. He grabbed his canteen and carefully lifted her head, letting water trickle into her mouth. She swallowed weakly, coughing. "That's it," he said, "just a little more." When she'd drunk enough. He examined the wound. The bullet had entered her left shoulder from behind, lodging deep in the muscle. If he didn't remove it, infection would kill her before dawn. He built a small fire in the shed's corner and heated the blade of his hunting knife until it glowed red. The girl had passed out again, a mercy. Corbin tore strips from his own shirt to use as bandages, then positioned the knife. What he did next took 20 minutes that felt like hours. When he finally extracted the bullet with a pair of pliers, his hands were shaking and sweat poured down his face. The girl had woken once during the procedure, screaming, but mercifully fainted again. Corbin held the bullet up to the firelight and felt his blood turn cold. Carved into the lead were 2 letters, N.C. Nathaniel Crane's son, Nathaniel Crane, Jr., the arrogant fool who fancied himself a marksman. This wasn't a military shooting. This was murder. Corbin dropped the bullet into his pocket, his mind racing. If Crane's boy had shot an Apache girl, it wasn't by accident. It was provocation, maybe even a plot to start a war that would bring the cavalry and make Crane's land grab easier. He finished bandaging the wound with strips of his shirt, then covered the girl with an old horse blanket. Her breathing had steadied, but she still looked deathly pale. As darkness fell, Corbin sat by the shed door with his rifle across his knees. The girl stirred several times, muttering in Apache. He caught one word repeated over and over, Shaye. He didn't know what it meant. Around 3 in the morning, she spoke a name clearly enough that Corbin's heart nearly stopped. James! His brother's name from an Apache girl's lips. Corbin stared at her unconscious face, piecing together what he'd refused to see before. His brother had lived with the Apache for months before that terrible night. He'd married into the tribe. He would have had family there, maybe even a sister-in-law or a niece. This girl might be his brother's family. The weight of that realization pressed down on Corbin like a physical thing. He'd killed James, and now James's people were coming. He heard them before he saw them. Drums, distant but rhythmic, echoing across the desert. Then, on the hill to the east, torches appeared, dozens of them, no hundreds. They formed a line across the ridge like a necklace of fire. Thunder whinnied nervously in the corral. Corbin stood slowly, his rifle suddenly feeling useless in his hands. He counted the lights. 50, 100, 200. More kept appearing. By the time the sky began to lighten, he estimated 300 warriors had surrounded his farm. They weren't attacking. They weren't advancing. They were waiting, waiting for dawn, waiting to see what the white man who had saved or captured one of their own would do next. Corbin checked on the girl one last time. She was still breathing, still alive. He set his rifle inside the shed and walked out into the yard, unarmed. Whatever came next, he would face it like James would have wanted, standing up, telling the truth, even if the truth meant his death. The sky turned from black to deep purple as dawn approached. Corbin stood in the center of his dirt yard, hands at his sides, watching the shadows take shape. 300 Apache warriors sat motionless on horses, forming a perfect circle around his property. Not one of them moved. Not one weapon was lowered. From the eastern ridge, a single rider descended. He moved slowly, deliberately, his horse picking its way down the rocky slope with practiced ease. As he drew closer, Corbin could see the man's face weathered and hard, maybe 55 years old, with gray streaking through his long black hair. He wore traditional Apache clothing, but across his saddle lay something that made Corbin's breath catch. A hunting knife in a leather sheath. Corbin recognized it immediately. He'd given that knife to James 15 years ago, back when they were still brothers in more than blood. The rider stopped 10 feet away and dismounted. He stood taller than Corbin expected, his posture radiating authority. This was a chief. Corbin knew it without being told. And if this man carried James's knife, then Corbin knew exactly who he was. Chief Dakota, James's adopted father. They stared at each other in silence. Behind Dakota, the 300 warriors remained perfectly still, like statues carved from stone. The only sound was the wind moving through the desert brush and Thunder's nervous breathing from the corral. Corbin understood this was a test. If he ran, he'd be cut down before he reached the house. If he called for help, it would mean war. If he reached for a weapon, he'd die before his hand closed around it. So he did the only thing that made sense. He walked slowly to the shed, opened the door wide. and stepped aside. Dakota's eyes narrowed, but he moved forward. Two other warriors dismounted and followed their chief. Hands on their weapons, inset, Kiona lay on the grain sacks, the horse blanket rising and falling with her shallow breathing. Her face was pale, her bandaged shoulders stained with blood that had seeped through during the night. Dakota knelt beside her, his weathered hand touching her forehead gently. He examined the bandages, noting how they'd been torn from cloth from Corbin's own shirt, now hanging in strips from his shoulders. The chief's fingers traced the careful knots, the clean wrapping. His gaze moved to the bowl of water beside her, still fresh and clear, then to the corner where Corbin had built a small fire to heat the knife for surgery. Dakota stood and turned to face Corbin. His expression revealed nothing, but his eyes held the weight of mountains. He walked past Corbin into the yard, and Corbin followed. The two men stood facing each other in the growing light. That's when Dakota reached into his belt and pulled out something small. He held it up between two fingers. The bullet, the one with NC carved into the lead. Corbin's mind raced. Dakota must have found it in the shed while examining Kiona. The chief had seen everything, the care Corbin had taken, the evidence of who had actually shot his daughter. "You speak English?" Dakota asked. His voice was deep and measured, carrying an accent but perfectly clear. "Yes." Corbin said, "My daughter, does she know who you are?" Corbin's throat went dry. Here it was, the moment of truth. "I don't know if she knows," he said carefully, "but I know who I am. I'm the man who killed James Thorne 10 years ago. I know he was your son." Something flickered in Dakota's eyes, but his face remained stone. "Then why?" the chief asked. "Why save her?" "You knew we would come. You knew what would happen." Corbin looked past Dakota to the 300 warriors watching. He thought of Sarah's photograph inside the house. He thought of James falling in the darkness, the mask coming off to reveal his brother's face. "Because I couldn't save my own daughter," Corbin said quietly. "She died 5 years ago because I had no money for medicine. I couldn't help her. I was useless." His voice cracked. "But I could help yours. Maybe that doesn't fix what I did. Maybe nothing fixes it. But I couldn't watch another girl die when I had the power to try." Dakota studied him for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He knelt down, placed the hunting knife on the ground between them, and pulled a small leather pouch from his belt. From it, he removed a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. "James wrote many things before he died," Dakota said. "He wrote about his white family, about his brother Corbin, who drank too much but had a good heart, about the night of confusion and darkness." The chief's jaw tightened. He wrote that if he died, we should not seek revenge. He said it would be an accident of war, not murder. Corbin felt tears burning in his eyes, but refused to let them fall. Dakota stood, towering over him. "My daughter will die or live by sunset. If she dies, you die with her. That is our law. If she lives, we will speak again." He gestured to 20 of his warriors. "They stay. You stay. No one else comes." "And if someone does come," Corbin asked, "then we will see whose law rules this land." Dakota mounted his horse and rode back up the ridge. The other warriors followed, leaving 20 men positioned around the farm like sentinels. Corbin looked up at the sun. estimating he had perhaps 12 hours until sunset. 12 hours to keep Keona else, 12 hours to decide if his own life was worth saving. He walked back to the shed, knelt beside the unconscious girl, and began to pray for the first time in 5 years. By 8 in the morning, the entire town of Redemption knew about the Apache surrounding Corbin Thorne's farm. A rancher named Pete Sullivan had ridden past at dawn, seen the warriors on the ridge, and galloped straight to Main Street, shouting about an impending massacre. Within an hour, Nathaniel Crane had called an emergency town council meeting in the back room of his mercantile store. 15 men crowded around a table covered with maps and coffee cups. Crane stood at the head, his silver hair slicked back, his expensive suit immaculate despite the desert heat. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the authority of wealth, "we have a situation. Corbin Thorne has harbored an Apache on his property. 300 savages have surrounded his farm in response. Now, I propose we do nothing." The room erupted in murmurs. "Nothing?" asked the baker, a stout man named Werner. "But Corbin's a white man. We can't just—" "Corbin Thorne," Crane interrupted, "owes my bank $850. He has 60 days to pay, which he cannot do. Furthermore, he's a drunk, a failure, and now apparently a traitor to his own people. If the Apache want to handle him, why should we risk our lives interfering?" The sheriff, a tired man named Hoskins, shifted uncomfortably. "That don't sit right. Nathaniel, man's entitled to help from his own kind. Is he?" Crane's eyes were cold. "When he's giving aid and comfort to the enemy, I call that treason. I call for a vote. All in favor of leaving Thorne to his fate." 12 hands went up. Only Sheriff Hoskins and the town doctor, Henry Morrison, kept their hands down. "Carried," Crane said with satisfaction. "No one goes near that farm. Spread the word." What Crane didn't tell them was that his son had come home 2 nights ago with powder burns on his hands and a story about teaching an Apache a lesson. Crane had burned his son's rifle and paid 2 Mexican workers to keep silent about seeing Junior near the Apache hunting grounds. If Corbin died and the girl died, the secret would die with them. Meanwhile, at the farm, Corbin changed Keona's bandages for the 3rd time. The bleeding had slowed, but her fever was rising. Her skin felt hot as a branding iron when he touched her forehead. He brought fresh water from the well, the same well his land was built around. The spring-fed source never ran dry, even in drought years. It was why Crane wanted this property so badly. Water meant power in the desert. Keona's eyes flickered open as he lifted her head to help her drink. She pulled back at first, frightened, but thirst won over fear. She drank in small sips, her throat working painfully. "You're safe," Corbin said quietly. "I'm not going to hurt you." She stared at him with those brown eyes, trying to understand. Then she whispered something in Apache, so quiet he barely heard it. He wished he knew what she was saying. He wished he could tell her that her father was waiting, that she just had to hold on until sunset. As noon approached, Corbin heard of horses. Not Apache horses, these came from the direction of town, moving fast. He stepped outside to see 50 cavalry soldiers cresting the hill, led by a young lieutenant with a pristine uniform and an arrogant jaw. Lieutenant William Foster pulled his horse to a stop 20 yards from the palm, his hand resting on his saber. Behind him, his men formed a line, rifles ready. The Apache warriors shifted on their horses but held position. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. "Corbin Thorne," Foster called out, "I'm here under orders from the territorial governor. You're to surrender the Apache prisoner in your custody immediately." "She's not a prisoner," Corbin called back. "She's wounded. She needs medical care." "That's not your concern. Surrender her now or face charges of treason." One of the Apache warriors raised his rifle. Instantly, 20 cavalry soldiers did the same. The farm had become a powder keg with a lit fuse. Corbin stepped forward, hands visible and empty. "If you start shooting, Lieutenant, everybody dies. Your men, the Apache, me, and an innocent girl. Is that what you want to report to the governor?" Foster's jaw clenched. He was young, maybe 25, and clearly hadn't expected resistance. The law says a man has the right to provide medical aid to the injured on his own property," Corbin interrupted. "I'm not harboring an enemy. I'm being a Christian. If that's treason, then lock me up after she's well enough to travel." The standoff lasted 5 minutes that felt like hours. Finally, Foster spat in the dirt and turned his horse around. "You've got until tomorrow, Thorne. Then I'm coming back with a warrant." As the cavalry rode away, Corbin noticed something. Foster wore a ring with the initials N.C. carved into the gold, Nathaniel Crane's son-in-law. The lieutenant was family. The web of conspiracy was becoming clearer. By 2 in the afternoon, Kiona's fever had spiked dangerously. Her body shook with chills despite the blanket, and she'd begun muttering in delirium. Corbin knew the signs infection was setting in. Without proper medicine, she'd be dead by midnight. He made a decision that would cost him everything. Saddling Thunder, he rode hard toward town, leaving the Apache warriors staring after him. The ride took 30 minutes of brutal sun and rattling over rocky terrain. When he reached Redemption's main street, people stopped and stared. Mothers pulled children inside. Men touched their holsters. Corbin dismounted at Dr. Morrison's office and pounded on the door. Morrison opened it a crack, his gray beard trembling. "Corbin, you shouldn't be here. Crane's spread the word. A girl is dying," Corbin said flatly. "Apache or not, she's 19 years old, and she's dying of infection. I need antibiotics, fever medicine, clean bandages. I can pay." "I can't," Morrison whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "Crane threatened to burn down my practice if I help you. Said you're a traitor." Corbin felt something break inside him. He'd known these people his whole life. He'd bought supplies at their stores, attended church with them, helped build their barns after storms. None of it mattered now. "Fine," he said. "Where's the nearest black market dealer?" Morrison's eyes widened. "You can't mean Corbin. That's illegal medicine. Probably no good." "Where?" The old doctor sighed and gave him a name. Miguel Rodriguez, a Mexican trader who worked out of a tent on the edge of town. Corbin found him within minutes and emptied his pockets $37. Everything he had. It wasn't enough. "The medicine you need costs $50, Miguel said apologetically. "Good medicine, clean but expensive. I got family to feed, senor." Corbin looked at Thunder, standing patient and loyal beside him. The gray horse had been with him for 3 years, through every lonely night and bitter morning. "I'll sell you my horse," Corbin said. "He's worth more than 50. Miguel examined Thunder with an expert eye and nodded slowly. I give you $30 for the horse, plus the medicine. That's the best I can do." Corbin ran his hand down Thunder's neck one last time, feeling the animal's warmth, its steady breathing. This horse had been his only friend. "Deal," he whispered. Walking back to the farm took 2 hours in the blazing sun. Corbin carried the medicine in a canvas bag, his boots raising small clouds of dust with each step. His feet blistered. His throat went dry. But he kept walking. When he finally reached the farm at 4:30, Kiona was worse. Her lips had turned blue, her breathing shallow and rapid. Corbin administered the medicine with shaking hands, pills dissolved in water. Antiseptic poured directly into the wound after removing the old bandages. Fever powder mixed with cool water. He worked methodically, the way he imagined a real doctor would. Then he sat back and waited. At 5 o'clock, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Kiona's eyes opened, really opened, focused and aware for the first time. She looked at him for a long moment, taking in his sunburned face, his torn shirt, his exhausted eyes. "Why, Hawa," she whispered in English, her accent thick but understandable. "Why you saved me?" Corbin's voice caught hers. "Because I owe your family a debt I can never repay." "You are?" She paused, searching for words. "You are the man who killed my brother." Not her biological brother, he realized. She meant James. "Yes," he said simply. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "James told me. Before he died. It was accident. War makes blind men of good men. He forgave you." Corbin felt something crack open in his chest, something he'd kept sealed for 5 years. His own tears came then, hot and unstoppable. He bowed his head, shoulders shaking. "I couldn't save my daughter," he choked out. "Sarah, she was 3 when James died. She died when she was 8 because I had no money for medicine. I was worthless. But I could save you. I had to." Kiona reached out with her good hand and touched his arm. "James spoke of you, said you had good heart but broken spirit. He wanted to come home, tell you he was alive. But war came first. War always comes first." They sat in silence as the sun painted the walls orange and red. At 6:30, drums began again in the distance. The sound rolled across the desert like thunder. Corbin helped Kiona sit up, supported her as she tried to stand. She was weak but alive, fever broken, eyes clear. Together, they walked out into the yard. 300 Apache warriors had returned, forming their circle once more. Chief Dakota rode down from the ridge alone, his face unreadable in the dying light. He looked at his daughter, standing on her own feet, bandaged but breathing. Then he looked at Corbin, who stood with nothing, no horse, no money, no weapon, no pride left to protect, just a man who'd kept a promise to himself, whatever the cost. Dakota dismounted and walked forward, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. The moment of judgment had arrived. Chief Dakota stood 10 feet from Corbin, the hunting knife glinting in the sunset's red light. Behind him, 300 warriors sat motionless, a wall of judgment waiting to see justice done. The drums had stopped. The desert itself seemed to hold its breath. Dakota gestured to the ground. "Sit," he commanded. Corbin sat cross-legged in the dirt. Kiona, supported by 2 Apache women who had come forward, was helped to sit on Dakota's right side. Corbin remained on the left, the position of the accused. Between them, Dakota placed the James's hunting knife, the blade pointing toward Corbin, like an arrow of fate. "We begin," Dakota said, his voice carrying across the silent circle. "This is how my people have settled blood debt for 1,000 years. Words will be spoken, truth will be heard, then judgment will come." He turned to face Corbin fully, his weathered face carved from stone. "James Thorne was not born to my blood, but he became my son in all the ways that matter. He came to us wounded, lost, seeking something his white world could not give him. We gave him family. We gave him purpose. He married into our tribe, learned our ways, and protected our people." Dakota's voice grew harder. 10 years ago, he rode out to warn a wagon train away from sacred land. He wore a mask to hide his white face, hoping to avoid the bloodshed, but in the darkness and confusion of men with guns and fear, my son had died. A bullet from his own brother's rifle ended his life before he could speak his name. Corbin felt each word like a physical blow, but he didn't look away. He owed Taco that much to face the truth without flinching. "For 10 years, I have carried this knife and this grief," Dakota continued. "I have asked the spirits what justice looks like. Should I kill the brother who took my son? Should I burn his farm? Should I start a war that would consume both our peoples?" He paused, his eye boring into Corbin's. "Then my daughter was shot by a white man's bullet and left to die in the desert, and the brother of my dead son saved her life." A murmur ran through the circle of warriors. This was news to many of them. Dakota held up the deformed bullet with the carved initials. "This bullet came from no soldier's gun. It came from a man who wanted war, who shot an Apache girl to provoke my people into attacking. This white man, Nathaniel Crane's son, is the real enemy. Yet it was you, Corbin Thorne, who pulled the bullet from my daughter's body. You who gave her water from your well, medicine bought with your last money, care from your own hands." He let the bullet drop to the ground between them. "So I ask you now, in front of my people and the spirits who watch, why save the daughter of the man whose son you killed?" Corbin's throat was dry, but he found his voice. "Because I couldn't save my own daughter. 5 years ago, Sarah died in my arms because I was worthless, because I had spent everything on whiskey and bad choices. I couldn't buy medicine. I couldn't help her." His voice cracked. "When I found Kiona, all I could see was Sarah, another girl dying when I had the power to try to save her. I couldn't walk away. Not again, even if it meant my death." "Did you know she was my daughter when you helped her?" "No. I only knew she was someone's daughter. That was enough." Dakota nodded slowly, then turned to Kiona. "My daughter, you have heard his words. You know who this man is. What do you say?" Kiona spoke in Apache, her voice weak but clear. She spoke for several minutes while Corbin watched, understanding nothing but feeling everything. When she finished, Dakota's expression had shifted, not quite softer, but something had changed behind his eyes. "My daughter says that James spoke of you often," Dakota translated. "He told her about his brother, who had demons but a good heart. James wrote letters that we found after his death, letters he never had a chance to send. In them, he wrote that if he died in the borderlands, we should not seek revenge. He wrote, 'My brother Corbin is no killer. He is a lost man trying to find his way. If I die by his hand, it will be because war made us blind to each other. Forgive him, for he is still my brother.'" Corbin felt tears streaming down his face. He didn't try to stop them. Dakota stood, his massive frame blocking the dying sun. Blood demands blood, this is the old law. But James has spoken from beyond death, asking for mercy. And you have proven that mercy can live in a white man's heart. He paused, and the weight of his next words pressed down on everyone present. I give you 3 choices. Corbin Thorne, choose carefully, for you will live or die by what you say next. The chief raised one finger. First choice, you may die here, now. And your blood will pay for James's blood. Your name will be honored as a man who accepted justice. This is the cleanest path. A second finger, second choice. You may live. But you must serve our tribe for 10 years as a worker, no better than a slave. You will haul water, tend horses, and do whatever labor we command. At the end of 10 years, you will be free. This is the path of penance. A third finger, third choice. You may live free. But you must prove your loyalty by killing a white man of our choosing, one who has wronged us. You will become an enemy to your own people forever. This is the path of betrayal. Silence fell like a hammer. 3 choices, each one terrible: death, slavery, or treason. The warriors waited. Kiona watched him with tears on her cheeks. The sun touched the horizon, turning the world to blood and gold. Corbin stood slowly, his legs trembling, but his voice steady. I don't choose any of those paths, he said. A ripple of shock moved through the gathered Apache. Dakota's eyes narrowed. There are no other choices. Then I make a 4th one, Corbin said, his voice growing stronger. I choose to live not as a slave, not as a traitor. I choose to live as a man who belongs to no side, but stands with honor on both. I won't kill for you. I won't die for you. But I will live for what's right, even if it means both our peoples hate me for it. He took a step forward, close enough to see the firelight reflecting in Dakota's dark eyes. Your son, James, lived between 2 worlds. He never chose one over the other. He chose to be a bridge. That's what got him killed, and that's what made him great. I can't bring him back. I can't undo the bullet that took his life. But I can try to be what he was, someone who sees people, not sides, someone who does right even when it costs everything. Corbin's voice rang across the desert. So if you want to kill me for that, Chief Dakota, then I'll die knowing I finally became the man my brother believed I could be. But I won't choose between honor and betrayal. I won't choose between death and slavery. I choose to stand in the middle and let that be enough. The silence that followed was absolute. 300 warriors, 1 chief, 1 wounded girl, and 1 white man standing in defiance of the ancient laws. Then Dakota did something no one expected, but he began to laugh. It started as a low rumble in his chest, then grew into a full, genuine laugh that echoed across the darkening land. He laughed until tears ran down his weathered cheeks, until the warriors began to shift uncomfortably, uncertain what was happening. Finally, he stopped and looked at Corbin with something like wonder in his eyes. You sound exactly like James, he said quietly. The same stubborn pride, the same foolish courage, the same refusal to bend when any sane man would break. He reached into his shirt and pulled out a necklace, the same turquoise stones Corbin had seen around Kiona's neck, but older, more worn. 7 stones carved with eagles, strung on leather that had been handled for years. "This belonged to my wife," Dakota said, his voice thick with emotion. "She died bringing Kiona into this world. Before she passed, she made me promise that these stones would only go to family to someone who understood that love is stronger than hate, that bridges matter more than walls." He stepped forward and placed the necklace around Corbin's neck. The stones were warm from Dakota's body heat, heavy with meaning. "You are no slave," Dakota declared, his voice carrying to every warrior present. "You are no traitor. You are Sheila, he who walks between. From this day forward, you are my son as James was my son. You are brother to my people. Any who harm you will answer to me." He turned to face the circle of warriors and raised his voice. "This white man has chosen the hardest path to live with honor when easier roads beckoned. He has proven that a man's heart matters more than the color of his skin. From tonight forward, he is one of us." The response came as a thunderous chorus. 300 voices shouted as one, "Sheila, Sheila, Sheila." The sound rolled across the desert like thunder, like drums, like the voice of the earth itself, declaring that justice had been served not through blood, but through recognition of a man's character. Kiona struggled to her feet and walked to Corbin on unsteady legs. She wrapped her arms around him, her tears soaking into his torn shirt. "Thank you," she whispered in English. "Thank you for showing me that not all white men are enemies, that some can see us as human." Corbin held her carefully, mindful of her wounded shoulder, and wept like he hadn't wept since Sarah died. These weren't tears of grief, though. These were tears of release, of a burden finally lifted, of redemption he'd never dared hope for. As night fell completely, the Apache built fires. They didn't leave. They stayed, circling Corbin's farm in a protective ring, declaring to anyone who might come that this man was under their protection now. Corbin touched the turquoise stones around his neck and looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere up there, he hoped James was watching, hoped his brother could see that the debt had finally been paid, not with more death, but with the hardest thing of all, choosing to live with honor when dying would have been easier. Dawn broke over Corbin's farm to find 300 Apache warriors still camped in protective circles. They stayed through breakfast, a silent statement that couldn't be ignored. By mid-morning, every soul in redemption knew that Corbin Thorne had been adopted into the Apache tribe, that he wore their sacred necklace, that Chief Dakota had called him brother. The reaction was immediate and vicious. Nathaniel Crane didn't waste time. By noon, he'd assembled the town council in his store's back room, the same 15 men who'd voted once before. This time, the air was thick with anger rather than fear. "Gentlemen," Crane said, not bothering with pleasantries, "we have a traitor living among us. Corbin Thorne has publicly sided with our enemies. He wears their jewelry. He's been proclaimed one of them. I move that we expel him from this town and all its commerce, effective immediately." "That seems harsh, Nathaniel," ventured the school teacher's father, a mild man named Mitchell. "He saved a girl's life. That's Christian charity, not treason." "He chose them over us," Crane snapped. "When Lieutenant Foster gave him the chance to surrender the Apache to proper authority, he refused. when given the opportunity to call for help from his own people, he stayed silent. The man has made his allegiance clear. Sheriff Hoskins cleared his throat. There's no law against helping someone who's wounded. Then we make it policy. Crane interrupted. All in favor of a complete commercial and social ban on Corbin Thorne, no seals, no services, no Christian fellowship until such time as he renounces his Apache connections, say aye. 12 hands rose. Only Hoskins, Morrison, and Mitchell abstained. "Carried," Crane said with satisfaction. "Spread the word. Corbin Thorne is no longer welcome in Redemption." Within a week, Corbin understood the full weight of what he'd accepted. The general store refused to sell him flour, sugar, or coffee. When he tried to buy ammunition for hunting, the clerk literally turned his back and served the customer behind him as if Corbin didn't exist. The blacksmith wouldn't shoe horses he no longer owned. The church locked its doors. When he approached on Sunday morning, children threw rocks at him when he walked down Main Street. A woman he'd helped build a barn for 3 years ago spat at his feet and called him Indian lover, like it was the vilest curse she could imagine. But the cruelest blow came from the bank. A formal letter arrived at his farm by courier, written in legal language that boiled down to simple brutality. The full amount of his loan, $850, was due within 7 days. Failure to pay would result in immediate foreclosure and seizure of poor property. Corbin had $37. He'd spent it all on medicine for a Kiona. Even if he sold every cow he owned, even if he sold the farm equipment and the timber from his shed, he couldn't raise $800 in a week. The bank knew it. Crane knew it. This was never about money. It was about punishment. By the second week, Corbin's situation had become desperate. He tried to sell cattle to neighboring ranches, but word had spread no one would buy from him at any price. He slaughtered 3 of his own steers for meat, salting what he could, knowing it would run out. His stored grain was nearly gone. The well, usually reliable even in drought, had started running low, whether from natural causes or sabotage. He couldn't tell. He ate once a day and tried to ignore the hollow feeling in his stomach. The third week brought an unexpected visitor. Dr. Morrison rode out to the farm after dark, his medical bag hanging from his saddle. He dismounted quickly, glancing over his shoulder like a man afraid of being followed. "I can't stay long," Morrison said, "but I needed you to know what they're doing to you is wrong, unchristian. I'm ashamed I didn't speak louder against it." "Then why don't you?" Corbin asked, not unkindly. Morrison's shoulders sagged. "I'm old. Corbin, 73 next month. Crane threatened to burn my practice if I help you openly. I've got nowhere else to go, no family to take me in. I'm a coward." He pressed a small package into Corbin's hands. "It's not much. Some hardtack, dried beef, a little coffee. It's all I could spare without my housekeeper noticing." After Morrison left, Corbin found one other person still willing to acknowledge his existence. Sarah Mitchell, the 28-year-old school teacher, stopped by the farm in broad daylight, riding her mare without shame or secrecy. "My father says I'm foolish," she told Corbin, sitting on his porch with a basket of bread and preserves. "The other teachers say I'm throwing away my reputation. But I watched what you did, Mr. Thorne. You chose right over easy. That's what I teach my students every day, to have moral courage. I'd be a hypocrite if I abandoned you for doing exactly that." "You'll suffer for this," Corbin warned. "Probably," she agreed. but I'll suffer with a clear conscience." Hoda, she was the only person in redemption who still looked him in the eye when she spoke. The second month brought the inevitable. The bank sent Sheriff Hoskins with foreclosure papers. The old lawman looked miserable as he handed them over. "I'm sorry, Corbin," he said quietly. "This isn't right. But it's legal. You've got 3 days to vacate." Nathaniel Crane himself arrived on the third day with a purchase offer. $100 for land worth $2,000. Corbin could refuse, but then the bank would auction the property, and Crane would buy it anyway. At least this way, Corbin would have something. "You brought this on yourself," Crane said, signing the papers on the hood of his carriage. "You chose savages over civilization. Now you'll live like a savage." Corbin took the $100 and walked away from the only home he'd built with his own hands. Everything he owned fit in a canvas pack on his back. His clothes, a cooking pot, the photograph of Sarah, and around his neck, the turquoise necklace that had cost him everything. By the third month, Corbin had set up a tent near the desert edge, on the boundary between white and Apache territory belonging nowhere. As he'd predicted, he found work with Mexican families who didn't care about town politics. They paid him $2 a day for backbreaking labor digging irrigation ditches, hauling stones, mending fences under a sun that bleached bones white. He was alone every night. No thunder to talk to, no friendly voice. Just the wind and the stars and the weight of his choices pressing down like a physical thing. Sometimes he'd hold the necklace and wonder if he'd been a fool, if dying that night would have been simpler than this slow grinding away of everything he'd been. The worst moment came in the 4th month, when loneliness drove him to visit Sarah's grave at the Redemption Cemetery. He arrived at dawn, hoping to avoid crowds. What he found shattered something inside him that he thought was already broken beyond repair. The small headstone he'd saved for months to buy had been smashed to pieces. Shards of marble lay scattered in the dirt. Someone had dug up part of the grave not deep enough to reach the coffin, but enough to violate the sacred ground, and carved into the wooden cross that marked where his daughter lay, someone had burned words with a hot iron, "Daughter of a traitor." Corbin's legs gave out. He collapsed onto his knees in the dirt, his hands trying to gather the broken pieces of marble that could never be made whole again. A sound came out of him that wasn't quite human, a keening wail of grief and rage and utter desolation. This was his daughter, his baby girl, Sarah, who'd loved butterflies and songs, who'd held his hand when she was scared, who'd died asking why Papa couldn't make the hurt stop. They desecrated her resting place to punish him. He'd cried twice in his adult life. Once when Kiona forgave him. Now, this crying over his daughter's vandalized grave while the sun rose over a town that had once been his home and was now his prison. Corbin stayed there until noon, carefully gathering every fragment of marble, trying to piece together his daughter's name. The townspeople walked past the cemetery gates. Some glanced his way. None stopped. None offered help or apology. That afternoon, broken and hollow, Corbin walked back to his tent in the wasteland. He had $100, no prospects, no friends in the white world, and a daughter's grave that he couldn't protect even in death. He'd chosen honor. This was its price. And the terrible thing, the thing that made him weep again as he lay in his tent that night, was that he'd make the same choice again, because the alternative was being the kind of man who'd let Kiona die to save himself discomfort. The kind of man who'd betrayed James's memory for the approval of people who'd desecrate a child's grave. He was broken. He was destitute. He was alone, but he wasn't that kind of man anymore. And somewhere in the darkness, clutching the turquoise stones, Corbin found that being able to say that was the only thing keeping him alive. 3 months after Corbin lost everything, Keona returned to redemption. She rode at the head of 50 Apache warriors, her healed shoulder straight and strong, her bearing regal despite her youth. The town froze when they entered Main Street at noon, horses moving in perfect formation, a living reminder that the Apache had not forgotten. Corbin was working a ditch 3 miles away when word reached him. By the time he arrived in town, covered in mud and sweat, Keona had dismounted in front of the sheriff's office. She held something wrapped in deerskin. When she saw Corbin approaching through the gathering crowd, she walked straight to him and unwrapped the package. Inside was the bullet, the one with NC carved into the lid. "My father kept this," she said in clear English, her accent still present, but her words precise. "He said when the time came, it would speak louder than any testimony. The time has come." Sheriff Hoskins emerged from his office, hand on his revolver, nervous about the armed warriors filling his street. "Miss, I don't know what you think. This bullet was removed from my body by Corbin Thorne," Keona said, her voice carrying across the silent street. "It bears the initials of the man who shot me. Not a soldier, not a raider, Nathaniel Crane, Jr., and I have witnesses who saw him do it." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Crane himself pushed forward, his face purple with rage. "That's a damned lie." "Is it?" Keona turned to face him. "Then explain why your son uses custom bullets with his initials carved in them. Explain why 2 Mexican miners working near the springs saw him fire at me and ride away. Explain why you paid them to stay silent." Sarah Mitchell stepped forward from the crowd, a leather portfolio in her hands. "I have documentation," she announced. "Letters between Nathaniel Crane and Lieutenant Foster discussing a plan to provoke Apache attacks. Attacks that would bring federal troops, which would drive down land prices, which would allow Crane to buy property at a fraction of its value." She opened the portfolio and began reading. Quote, "If the savages can be made to strike first, the cavalry will have justification to clear the territory, land values will plummet, and we can acquire holdings for pennies on the dollar. Signed, Nathaniel Crane." "Those are forgeries," Crane sputtered, but his voice lacked conviction. "They're from your own office," Sarah replied. "Your clerk provided them. Mr. Howell has been keeping records of your activities for years, waiting for someone brave enough to use them." The crowd's mood was shifting. People who'd spit at Corbin weeks ago now looked uncertain, uncomfortable. Chief Dakota dismounted and walked to stand beside his daughter. "We request a trial," he said formally. "Under your law, before your judge, we will present evidence. If your justice is true, it will see what is clear." Sheriff Hoskins looked at the 50 armed warriors, at the growing crowd of townspeople, at the documents in Sarah's hands. "I'll send for Judge Whitmore," he said finally. "He's circuit judge, 2 days' ride. But, Mr. Crane, you should know that if these allegations prove true—" "My son is innocent," Crane said. but he'd gone pale. "This is Apache trickery." The trial convened 4 days later in the largest building available, the Methodist Church. Ironically, the same church that had locked its doors against Corbin. Judge Whitmore, a stern man of 60, with a reputation for fairness, presided from behind the pulpit. The prosecution called its witnesses. First came the 2 Mexican miners, hat in hand. Speaking through a translator, they testified that they'd seen Crane Jr. shoot at someone near the Apache hunting grounds, then ride away at speed. They'd been afraid to come forward because Crane had threatened their families. Then came the ballistics expert from the territorial capital, who confirmed the bullet matched the unique rifling pattern of Crane Jr.'s custom rifle. More damning. He showed the judge a box of bullets from Crane's home, every one carved with the same NC initials. Keona took the stand, speaking in English that shocked the courtroom. She described being shot without warning while gathering medicinal plants, crawling for hours until she collapsed near Corbin's well. She described waking to find a white man giving her water, removing the bullet, bandaging her with strips of his own shirt. "He did not know who I was," she said clearly. "He did not ask my tribe or my name. He saw only a dying girl who needed help. That is the measure of a man's character." When Corbin took the stand, he told the truth simply. He'd found Keona dying. He'd saved her because letting anyone die when he could help was something he couldn't do again, not after failing his daughter. He'd kept the bullet because something about it seemed wrong. He'd never imagined it would prove a conspiracy. Then came the moment that broke the case wide open. Dr. Morrison stood in the witness box, his hands shaking, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to confess something," he said. "Nathaniel Crane came to my home the night after Corbin brought Keona to his farm. He told me if I provided medical care to the Apache girl, he'd burn down my practice. He said he needed the Indians to retaliate so the cavalry would clear the territory. He said his son had started the ball rolling by shooting one of their girls." The courtroom erupted. Judge Whitmore's gavel cracked like thunder. "Order, Dr. Morrison. Are you testifying under oath that Nathaniel Crane confessed to conspiracy in provoking violence?" "Yes, Your Honor," Morrison said, tears streaming down his aged face. "And I was too much a coward to speak until now. God forgive me." Sarah Mitchell presented the letters. Lieutenant Foster's resignation was read into the record. He'd fled the territory rather than face charges. The evidence piled up like stones on a cairn, each one another weight crushing Nathaniel Crane's defense. The verdict came after 2 hours of deliberation. Nathaniel Crane Jr. was sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison for attempted murder and conspiracy to incite war. Nathaniel Crane Sr. was stripped of his properties and holdings, which would be auctioned to pay restitution to his victims, including Corbin Thorne, whose farm would be returned to him. Judge Whitmore addressed the courtroom before dismissing them. "Let this be a lesson to all present. Justice does not see color or tribe. It sees only truth and lies. Corbin Thorne was condemned by this community for doing what any Christian should do, showing mercy to the suffering. Meanwhile, the real criminals walked among you wearing respectability like a mask. Shame on those who persecuted an innocent man while enabling the guilty." As people filed out, few met Corbin's eyes. There were no apologies, no admission of wrongdoing, from those who'd thrown rocks at him, destroyed his daughter's grave, or spat at his feet. They simply left, uncomfortable with their own reflection in the mirror of justice. Only Sarah Mitchell and Dr. Morrison approached him. Morrison gripped his hand. "I'm sorry I failed you when you needed help most." "You spoke the truth when it mattered," Corbin replied. "That takes more courage than many have." Outside, Chief Dakota waited with his warriors. "The white man's justice surprised me today," he said. "Perhaps there is hope for both our peoples." "Perhaps," Corbin agreed, though he felt no triumph. He'd been vindicated. Yes, his name cleared, his farm restored, but the faces of those who'd persecuted him, who even now slipped away without apology, told him nothing fundamental had changed. They'd accepted the verdict because a judge forced them to, not because their hearts had softened. Keona touched his arm. "Will you return to your farm now?" Corbin looked at the church, the town, the people who would tolerate him legally but never truly accept him. Then he looked at the Apache warriors, at Dakota and Keona, at the turquoise necklace around his neck. "I don't know," he said honestly. "The farm is mine again, but I'm not sure I belong there anymore. I'm not sure I belong anywhere." "You belong with those who see your heart," Dakota said, "not with those who see only your skin." As the sun set over redemption, Corbin stood between two worlds, vindicated but not victorious, freed but not forgiven, wondering what kind of life a man could build when he'd chosen honor over belonging. The answer would come, but not today. 6 months after the trial, Corbin made his decision. He stood at the boundary of his reclaimed farm, the land deed in his hands, and knew with absolute certainty that he couldn't live there again. Too much had happened. Too many ghosts walked those fields. He rode into redemption one final time and found Sarah Mitchell at the schoolhouse. She looked up from her desk, surprised to see him. "I want to give you something," he said, placing the deed on her desk. "The farm, all 20 acres, the well, everything." Sarah's eyes widened. "Corbin, I can't possibly—" "You and Dr. Morrison." He continued, "Turn it into a school, a real one, where Apache children and white children can learn together. Just teach them what this town forgot, that people are people, regardless of the color of their skin." Tears filled Sarah's eyes. "What will you do?" "Chief Dakota has offered me land on Apache territory, 20 acres near a good water source. I'm going to build a new home there, not between two worlds anymore, just in a different world. Will you be happy there?" Corbin touched the turquoise necklace. "I think I'll be at peace. That's close enough." The new life came slowly, like dawn creeping across the desert. Dakota's people helped Corbin build a small cabin from timber and adobe, simple but solid. He learned to speak Apache, stumbling over the unfamiliar sounds until children giggled at his pronunciation. He taught English to those who wanted to learn, sitting in the shade with young warriors who saw value in understanding their neighbor's language. He was not Apache, and they never pretended otherwise. But he was family, and that mattered more. Keona visited often while her shoulder fully healed. She'd walk with Corbin through the desert, pointing out plants her people used for medicine, telling him stories of Apache history that went back centuries. In return, he taught her to read and write English with greater fluency, knowing that the future would require bridges between cultures. "You're good at this," she told him one afternoon, watching him help a young boy sound out words. "Teaching, being patient. James would have liked seeing this. I hope so, Corbin said. I'm trying to be the brother he deserved. 2 years after the trial, Kiona announced her engagement to a warrior named Takeda II, named after her father. The young man was serious and brave, a respected hunter who'd proven himself in defending the tribe from raiders. Corbin liked him immediately. The wedding ceremony was held under a full moon, with drums and singing and rituals that Corbin was still learning to understand. When the time came for family to stand with the bride, Dakota gestured for Corbin to join them. You saved my daughter's life. The chief said quietly, You stand with us as family. Corbin took his place beside Kiona, tears blurring his vision as she was married under stars that didn't care about the color of anyone's skin. When the ceremony concluded, Kiona turned to him and removed her turquoise necklace, the one her mother had worn, the one Dakota had given Corbin that night of judgment. This should stay in the family, she said, placing it in his hands. But I want you to keep it. When I have a daughter, I'll ask you to give it to her, too. And you will tell her the story of the man who chose honor over comfort, who became her grandfather in spirit, if not in blood. I'm not leaving it to anyone, Corbin protested. I'll be here. I know, Kiona smiled. That's why I want her to receive it from you. So she understands what the necklace really means, that family is made by choice and character, not just by birth. The years passed like water flowing downstream, steady and sure. Corbin's hair turned gray, his face lined by sun and wind. He never remarried, never had more children, but he was not alone. The Apache children called him Uncle Shiloh, and he taught 3 generations to read and write. 20 years after that terrible night when 300 warriors had surrounded his old farm, Corbin stood on a hill overlooking both Apache land and the distant town of Redemption. He was 55 years old, his body weathered but strong. Before him stood a wooden cross he'd carved himself. It marked no grave. James's body had been honored by Apache tradition long ago, but Corbin had wanted a place to remember, a spot where he could speak to his brother's spirit. The cross bore simple words, James Thorne, brother, father, friend. He built bridges. Corbin knelt in the dirt, his joints protesting the movement. Hey, James, he said quietly. As he did every year on the anniversary, I wanted to tell you, I finally understand. You didn't die because you were foolish. You died because you refused to choose sides, because you saw people as people. The wind rustled through desert sage, carrying the scent of rain that might fall by evening. I lost everything when I made the same choice. Corbin continued, my farm, my reputation, my place in the white world. But I found something better. I found family that chose me. I found peace that can't be taken away. I found out who I really am when everything else is stripped away. He touched the turquoise necklace, worn smooth by 2 decades of wear. You were right, brother. Honor isn't about picking a side. It's about picking humanity. Every single time, even when it cost you everything. Corbin stood slowly, his shadow long in the afternoon sun. Below, he could see smoke rising from Apache cooking fires. In the distance, The town of redemption was just visible, smaller than he remembered, less important than it once seemed. A man could lose everything, his land, his money, his name, even his place in the world. But if he kept his soul intact, if he could look at himself in the mirror and see someone worth being, then he was richer than any man who'd traded his conscience for comfort. Corbin walked down the hill toward home, toward the people who'd become his family, toward a life built on choice rather than accident of birth. Behind him, the wooden cross stood silhouetted against the sky, a monument to a man who'd died building bridges and a brother who'd learned to walk across them. The desert wind whispered through the sage, carrying stories between two worlds, reminding anyone who'd listen that the greatest courage isn't found in war or conquest. It's found in choosing, every single day, to be human first. If you've made it this far in Corbin's story, maybe you've stood where he stood. Maybe you've faced a choice between doing what's right and doing what's easy. Maybe you've lost something precious because you refuse to compromise your values. If so, you already know what Corbin learned in that desert. True happiness isn't found in having everything. It's found in keeping the one thing nobody can take away: your integrity. Corbin lost his farm, his reputation, his place in society. But he gained something infinitely more valuable. He gained peace, the kind of peace that lets you sleep at night, that lets you look in the mirror without shame, that lets you face your final years knowing you were true to yourself when it mattered most. Family isn't always blood. Honor isn't always rewarded, and sometimes the hardest path leads to the most beautiful destination. Corbin found his family among people who saw his heart rather than his mistakes. He found happiness not in wealth or acceptance, but in knowing he'd become the man his brother always believed he could be. Here's my question for you. Have you ever had to choose between what's right and what's comfortable? What did that choice cost you? And would you make it again? Drop your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.